Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. We're here in the, perhaps remote, but certainly shadow of Hurricane Florence. And we obviously support the efforts of the authorities and first responders, and we demand seamless financial backup that you will not get from the Trump regime, because he regards those things as essentially useless expenditures. Now, we have two strategic matters to lead off with. Of course, today is Saturday, the 15th of September, when this program first airs. We, of course, record on the afternoon of Friday, September 14th. But by the time you hear this, it will be the 10th anniversary of the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, which came in the middle of and much exacerbated the world derivatives panic of 2008. It's actually of 2007 through 2009, a very big world financial crisis, certainly not explainable through poor people buying subprime mortgages on blighted slum properties and then defaulting. That is, of course, the Hannity-Limbaugh version of the crisis. That is, of course, a bad joke. You cannot bring down the entire late imperialist banking system with these tertiary, quaternary kinds of investments, right? They don't add up to anything. When you realize that the Federal Reserve put $28 trillion at the disposal of the banks to restore confidence, you will see then, of course, that this simply, the orders of magnitude are all out of proportion. And naturally, we look around the world, we see the crisis of the Turkish lira. The interest rates there have now been jacked up from 17.75% interest on Turkish lira deposits to 24%. So a good hefty increase, 6.25%, I guess, or 625 basis points, as these stock jobbers and insiders want you to say. Following that, the Indian rupee, not in such good shape, as well as other currencies around the world. So we are in another bubble. Look at the valuations on the stock market and ask yourself if those valuations deal with real increases in employment, production, capital investment. They don't. That's pure speculation. Derivatives, once again, and other forms, right? It used to be called credit default. It used to be called collateralized debt obligations. Now they're called collateralized loan obligations, and they are back in a big way. So this is simply a question of time, and it's simply a question of time until something happens, and, will it be before the election or after? And actually, it's better to take your medicine sooner rather than later, wouldn't you say? So the idea there is that we're getting more and more of these forecasts, right, prognostications that things are going to turn south fairly soon. But let's now go through the two leading political stories. We have new allegations, new accusations against Judge Kavanaugh, the adventurer, the freebooter, this picaresque personality, scofflaw, who wants to get on the Supreme Court. We're going to call him Lying Brett. Lying Brett. because he lies. He's guilty of perjury. Any fool can see it in the Senate hearings. Right? Any normal person, would have been shut down in 2004 or 2006. And instead, he's still going strong on an upward trajectory now, and it's still 2018. So this is a scandal, right? This shows the double standard that plutocrats with Republican fascistoid backing can have wonderful careers despite constant abuses. Now, we know that Cav is a liar. Lion Brett Kavanaugh is a liar. We have reason to believe that he's a gambler. He may be a compulsive gambler who racked up tens of thousands of dollars of financial debt. Some sugar daddy may have come in to pay that for him, and he ends up being a mouthpiece for the mob or something of the sort on the Supreme Court. Maybe it was foreign interests that paid him off, if that's what happened. So those are scenarios, hypothetical, to be sure. But the gambling has been reported. Now, he denies everything, of course. But then, of course, see point A, that he's widely accused of also being a liar. Distinguished U.S. senators, right? The most senior member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. That would be the distinguished Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, right? Past chairman of that committee. We'll give you some quotes from an op-ed by him. But this is now, in addition to the lying and the gambling, we now have date rape. Date rape. You want somebody on the Supreme Court who's accused of date rape? I don't care how long ago. This is simply for that. There are only 9 of those jobs. They are lifetime appointments. Nobody with the shadow of moral turpitude should be allowed to get that nod. Now, the most relevant thing here is an article by the formidable Ronan Farrow and the formidable Jane Mayer, the two of them who teamed up on Weinstein and some others. Ronan Farrow and Jane Mayer posted this article on the New Yorker website. This actually went up on Friday, I think, but it is now, Friday at 10:30 in the morning. So this is just for a couple of hours ago as we speak to you. The headline, sexual misconduct allegation against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh stirs tension among Democrats in Congress. Yeah, and this is more than just some pesky disturbance, right? Does this body, these 9 pedants and legal positivists, does that have moral authority? Does it have any reason? Because, these institutions are not eternal. And the Supreme Court, going back to Franklin D. Roosevelt, his attack on the 9 old men, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse at the center of the majority, right? That was the rats cabal of the late 1930s, that they were systematically blocking anything that the New Deal government tried to do to help working people, to get the country out of depression. And they said, no, you're violating the free market. You're violating our Lochner precedent, right? Lochner precedent is that you're not allowed to regulate labor. But with wages and hours, child labor laws, which Senator Lee thinks are unconstitutional, it was done, and eventually the 9 old men and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse had to yield. We want Kavanaugh to yield now, preemptively. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., and now we want to invite, naturally, all of our friends around the world. Special emphasis on Europe, because that is pretty much the heart of the pro-civilization coalition, along with Japan, South Korea, and the Australia, New Zealand in the Far East. But We are on the air Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday on the American System. You go to americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and there you find our nightly broadcast at about 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Daylight time here goes until just about the end of October, right? Summertime then ends, and we go back to Eastern Standard Time. So let's take a look, first of all, at the leading edge of this scandal. On Thursday, Senate Democrats disclosed, and I'm quoting here from the article by Ronan Farrow and Jane Mayer that appeared in the New Yorker this morning, the morning of February, not February 14th, but September 14th, right? Kavanaugh's nobody's Valentine. Let's not get that confused. On Thursday, yesterday, Senate Democrats said they had referred a complaint. Now, this is a criminal complaint in its form, at least, for Kavanaugh to the FBI. And this comes from a woman who accuses Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct when they were both in high school in the early 1980s. So it's about 35 years ago. Now, this woman who does not want to be identified, she does not want to go public. I have to say, speaking realistically, this may be out of her hands. The means of finding people in the modern world are formidable, and her quest for anonymity, I think, is probably not realistic. But she approached Democratic members of Congress in July, very soon after Trump nominated Kavanaugh. So the time we're talking about, the alleged attempted date rape, was when Kavanaugh was a high school student at the very tony and expensive private school, Georgetown Preparatory School in Bethesda, run by Jesuits, as I recall. So this is south, down close to the district border on 355 Wisconsin Avenue, right? That's Frederick Road, but at that point it's just 355 Wisconsin Avenue. So the woman attended a nearby high school. In the letter the woman sent to members of Congress, she says that at a party, Kavanaugh and one other male companion of his, I guess, there's a question of did they get her into a room and then lock the door? But according to this account in the New Yorker, Kavanaugh held her down. He attempted to force himself on her. She claims that Kavanaugh and his classmate, I guess from Georgetown Prep, both of whom had been drinking, turned up the music to conceal the sounds of her protests or her cries for help. Kavanaugh covered his mouth with her hand. She was able to free herself. Although the alleged incident took place decades ago, and the three individuals were minors, the woman said that the memory had been a source of ongoing distress for her and that she had sought psychological treatment as a result. Now, Kavanaugh characteristically denies everything. I categorically and unequivocally deny this allegation. I did not do this back in high school or at any time. The classmate seems to be identified or identifiable, and he says, I have no recollection of that. Now, here's the problem. The woman wants to remain anonymous. She does not want to come forward. She doesn't want to be Anita Hill. Anita Hill, the witness who came forward against the similar abuser and molester, we might say, Clarence Thomas, in those hearings at the beginning of the 1990s, right? 1991, I guess. Kavanaugh denies everything, but back then, Anita Hill thought that she could make her contribution to the work of the Senate Judiciary Committee. At that time, Ted Kennedy was the dominant figure. So she was saying, I just want to speak from behind the scenes. Well, her anonymity was proved impossible to preserve. We don't need to examine exactly how. And then, of course, there were other witnesses. There was at least one other woman, and probably more, according to recent documentary films, who wanted to come forward and also testify, or would have been willing to do it. And they were blocked by a number of people. One of them was Joe Biden. The great Lunch Bucket Joe was not interested in hearing the full rundown on Clarence Thomas. Now, that ought to point us towards another escape hatch. In other words, if you're afraid of a fascist dictatorship enabled through puppet judges on the Supreme Court, well, one way to do something about that majority, right, that orchestrated fake majority, is to go back and revisit what exactly was up with Clarence Thomas and how many other women were involved back then, right? It's not so much a legal matter as it is a political and moral question. And, well, go back and find out what you didn't find out, right? Maybe Biden could lead the effort with a declaration that he was wrong not to hear all the relevant witnesses that could have shored up the Anita Hill story. Because, of course, Clarence Thomas got on the Supreme Court, and he's still there, and he is presumably the most extreme right-wing judge that they have, justice, I guess we have to say, on the Supreme Court. All right, so the woman involved, according to the New Yorker, had talked to friends since the name of Kavanaugh came into the news because of the nomination. She said, oh, this is reviving painful memories for me. I don't know if I should go public. She contacted her congresswoman, Anna Eshoo, E-S-H-O-O-O, Democrat of California, with a letter. And Eshoo's office will not comment. They say strict confidentiality on all constituent service matters. The letter also went to Dianne Feinstein, the head of the Democratic minority, the ranking member, and apparently Feinstein dithered for a while. Right? She wanted to be bipartisan, I guess. This is absolutely insane, unacceptable. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. So, the woman involved, who apparently lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, decided that she would not speak about this matter publicly. And eventually she became demoralized because it looked like Kavanaugh was becoming inevitable. Now, it obviously would have been a very good idea for our heroes in the Democratic Party to mobilize the resources of the Me Too movement and attempt to dispel this idea of the inevitability of Kavanaugh, right? We are unabashed supporters of the primacy of politics in all these matters, and how you evaluate these things depends on the political effect. The Me Too was very badly handled, right? Who were the victims? Two senior Democratic figures, right? Congressman Conyers, the second longest serving black member of the House of Representatives, former head of the House Judiciary Committee. He was forced out by accusations. And then, of course, the story of Al Franken, with people from Fox News coming forward against him and nevertheless enjoying credibility, which is difficult to understand in today's world. And, of course, Feinstein, right? Feinstein, always a defeatist. Feinstein, for several days, declined requests from other Democrats to share this letter and other relevant communications. Feinstein, pessimistic, defeatist. The incident is too far in the past to merit public discussion, and we will take care of it. On Wednesday, after media inquiries this past week, media inquiries to the Democratic members multiplied. concern increased, Feinstein finally said she would share the details with other Democrats on the committee, but no staff. Well, these are strange values, right? The individual wants confidentiality, and again, it may not be feasible in today's world. So the White House, of course, tries to mock it. They say, "Oh, this is coming at the wrong time." It'll be amazing when the Trump White House says, "Yes, this is apropos. This is coming at exactly the right time." Right? This is the time to debate it. Right? Somebody gets shot up. No, it's not the time. Somebody's about to get on the Supreme Court. No, you should have brought this forward weeks ago or months ago. I'm sorry. There is no rush. The rush to judgment in these hearings is a monstrosity because you're dealing with lifetime appointments. And whether there are all the judges sitting on the bench in the first week of October is totally indifferent. We don't give a damn about the numbers on the Supreme Court. Let them work a little bit harder or let them delay their sessions, right? The government may still shut down over that. We'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, there you have that side. So we are incensed. We're really wondering, maybe out in California, right? There's still an election. There's still that guy De Leon who is running. He's a Democrat. He's running against Feinstein. And maybe it's time to retire Feinstein. Because if this is her idea of putting up a fight, and all these people, they'll always say, "Oh, we don't want to have dirty politics. We don't want to have that kind of partisan approach that the Republicans have." Dear friends, people's lives are at stake. And what this amounts to on the part of Feinstein and others is to say, my pretenses, my posturing, my exquisite sensibilities are more important than the lives of people who are going to die. If the Republicans take over the Supreme Court, back alley abortions kill. If the Republicans maintain their control over the federal government, Obamacare will be destroyed, 40 to 50,000 needless deaths if they go on to destroy Medicare, Medicaid, and indeed Social Security. How many deaths will be dealing with? And where do your petty, stupid, petty bourgeois concerns about bipartisanship, where do they show up on that scale? They are nowhere. They are de minimis. We don't care about you and your problems of conscience or your problems of image. Anyway, Feinstein is also out of touch because the Democratic voters don't want that. They want effective action. They want to see somebody fighting. When some of us saw that there had been this revelation yesterday afternoon, we put out at last a little bit of fight. But again, the more you learn about it, the less fight there seems to be. But now let's go on to Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, those rock-ribbed, iron-souled New Englanders. And what's he up to? So this is the Friday opinion page. It's the sort of secondary op-ed page of the Washington Post for today. And this is called The Truth in quotes, and The Judge by Patrick Leahy. Now, here's his spiel. Let me quote the senator. Last week, I, Patrick Leahy, ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, uncovered new evidence that Supreme Court nominee Brett M. Kavanaugh, lying Brett, misled the Senate during his earlier hearings for the D.C. Circuit Court by minimizing and even denying his involvement in Bush-era controversies, mainly dirty tricks. I gave him the opportunity to correct his testimony at his hearing last week, and he chose instead to double down. He's already on the second highest court, the D.C. Court of Appeals, federal, and he repeatedly misled the Senate when he might have been ousted from this capability back in 2004 and 2006. He was in close relations with the ringleader of the Memogate scandal of 2001 to 2003. So this is Bush the younger, a thug trying to put in thug judges. These people, Miguel Estrada, a number of others, right? Some of them got on the court, appellate court. But and the guy involved is the staffer Manny Miranda. I don't think he mentions his name, but that's who he's talking about, according to published reports. So this staffer, two staffers, regularly gained unauthorized access, broke in to the private computer files of 6 Democratic senators, including Leahy's, taking a total of 4,670 files on controversial judicial nominations. Kavanaugh was asked more than 100 times about this scandal in 04-06. He denied everything. Stonewall, no, not me. Nix, nada. But now, the difference is that thanks to the efforts, which originally seemed to be fruitless, but now may bear fruit in the form of the fall of the odious and despicable Kavanaugh, we now have emails. We now have emails that were obtained last week, sometimes during the hearings, concerning Manuel Miranda, right? Manny Miranda, he is in there. He regularly shared obviously ill-gotten inside information with Kavanaugh, which Miranda told Kavanaugh in many cases to keep secret. This includes 8 pages from a Democratic memo taken verbatim from Senator Leahy on a controversial nominee, and how they were going to question him, how they were going to try to challenge, block, abort his nomination. Confidential. Don't do anything about this. Just know it. Well, it was obviously stolen property, wasn't it? Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tuffy in Washington, D.C. So the the indictment practically by Leahy of Kavanaugh here in the pages of the Washington Post is devastating. It goes back to the attempt by the Bush people to put William Pryor, a lunatic ideologue, onto the 11th Circuit. This is a guy, William Pryor had called Roe versus Wade an abomination, and that same-sex marriage would include necrophilia, bestiality, and pedophilia, said William Pryor. So Kavanaugh in 2004 said, no, I got nothing to do with that. But emails suggest that Kavanaugh recommended Pryor for this seat, participated in a working group on the nomination, talked to a reporter about him, and even interviewed him. So whereas the attention, probably correctly, inevitably anyway, focuses on the sex abuses of Kavanaugh, even if during his high school years, that then has to be supplemented by a very substantive, very detailed, and really irrefutable case here. For example, Kavanaugh misled the Senate about other controversial nominees. William Haynes, this was, he had a lot to do with the torture policies of the Bush administration. Charles Pickering, another judge, had reduced the sentence of a man who burned a cross, Ku Klux Klan style, on the front of an interracial couple's house. Time and time again, Kavanaugh appears to have misled the Senate under oath, writes Leahy. So we're still struggling along with 7% of Kavanaugh's record. Remember, well, it's been that way, right? 90% approximately is hidden, like the proverbial iceberg, and we're not getting to see it. In particular, the Trump White House, Trump himself specifically, withholding 102,000 pages of records, and a lot of this has to do with judicial nominations. Who did who did Kavanaugh want to put on these appellate courts and the Supreme Court in advance? Now, Leahy then has a usual bipartisan song and dance at the end. He worked with Jeff Sessions on Kagan, on other nominees, Roberts, and so forth. So, no, at this point, no. He says Lee actually, this is embarrassing. He says that he voted for more Republican-nominated judges, including Roberts, than the vast majority of Republicans. Oh, my Lord. This is not the Democratic Party we want. But finally, better late than never, you're coming out here. Setting aside my concerns about what a Justice Kavanaugh would mean for the rights of Americans, well, you can't do that. I cannot support a nominee for a lifetime seat to this high court who casts aside truth in pursuit of raw ambition. Unimpeachable integrity must never be optional. Yeah, well, unimpeachable. I hope that contains the personal commitment that if Kavanaugh does get on the Supreme Court, that when this mass of documents finally comes out, because it will, inevitably, as Senator Blumenthal pointed out during the hearings, that maybe they go back and take a second bite. But, of course, that's all in the hypothetical future. Maybe we won't live that long with Trump in the White House and his hand on the thermonuclear button. So we urge people to mobilize, right? What's going to happen during the weekend is, the big question is, will more women come forward with similar accusations? Oh, and by the way, they've thought of this, the Republican attack machine, right? The Federalists and the judicial crisis people, they have come forward, and we have a group of 60 to 70 women who say that they knew Kavanaugh during high school and that he would never do that. They say, no, we knew him. He didn't do that kind of stuff. He was not a molester. Here we go, 65. A group of 65 women have come to the defense of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, who is facing an allegation of sexual misconduct from the early 1980s in the lead-up to his confirmation vote. So what do they say? For the entire time we have known Brett, he has behaved honorably and treated women with respect, say the 65 or so, in a letter to Chairman Grassley of the Senate, that's Senator Gastley, for those of us who want to call things by their names. They sent the same thing to Feinstein. And again, not all high school. They know Kavanaugh through various activities and are close to him and his family. Now, this is suspicious, right? Did they know the charges were coming? How do you improvise a letter like this in 24 to 48 hours? That implies a staff of, 50 to 100 people. I think there are some of these groups that have that. But is that a smart career move? What does that represent? I'm very, very suspicious of this because it looks like they had it on the shelf, and then when it was required, they simply pushed send, and out it went. And we'd like to know far more about these individuals, right? And how do they know him? He's got friendship, character, and integrity. I'm sorry, that's simply unbelievable. Let me just add a personal note. If you watch these hearings, which I did, here's what you notice. And this, I think it's absolutely fundamental. This guy, Kavanaugh, lying Brett, does not look his critics in the eye. You'd think that they would have, coached him on that. When the Democrats were coming after him with whatever they had, he would look away. He would look down, he'd pretend to be writing things, and he'd make a kind of a supercilious face, right, with pursed lips, sort of puckering out. and supercilious, unwilling to look the critic in the eye, thereby body language, dishonesty. That's my finding. The supercilious Kavanaugh. And remember, Lisa Graves has put out, and you can see this, go to Tarpley, Webster G. Tarpley on Twitter. Scroll down a little bit, you'll come to Lisa Graves, who wrote some of the memos that were stolen and then found their way, in whole or in part, into the emails of Judge Kavanaugh. So there you've got somebody who says, not only should he not be on the Supreme Court, but he should be impeached from the job that he now has. Impeach him as member of this very influential and important federal circuit, right? The United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, which handles all the administrative law, antitrust, all kinds of things like this, right? He's already far too important. He has succeeded all too well in his reactionary enterprise. And again, not just reactionary, but that he was receiving, according to Lisa Graves, former Democratic Annie Miranda affair. All right, we'll be back in a minute with the second hour of World Crisis. To the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. Now, we devoted most of the first hour to the question of stopping Kavanaugh, because this is the most urgent of all these questions. Remember the perspective outlined by Nunes, the malefactor of the House Judiciary Committee, and his sidekick there, McMorris Rodgers, the desperate candidate up in Spokane. Their Republican perspective is to get Kavanaugh installed and then proceed to attack Rosenstein, Mueller, and any other forces of resistance in the Justice Department. So the question of dictatorship or not hangs to some extent on the effectiveness of the opposition to Kavanaugh, which is why you really have to wonder if anybody has personal considerations about this. Is it legit for those to stand in the way? We would obviously argue no. Remember the old Latin saw, right? Salus Republicae lex suprema. The health of the republic is the supreme law. All other things must bend. And I think we're primarily talking about the fussy pro-independent proclivities of somebody like Di-Fi out there. And by the way, some of these articles say, without providing any details or sources or anything, the FBI is going to do absolutely nothing about this. You give this to the FBI, they'll obviously say, oh, no, we already did 2 or 3 rounds when he went into the Bush White House, when he went on the federal bench, and now a third time. There's nothing more to discover, right? We are the FBI. Nothing escapes us, and so forth. So if you want this, again, the most effective thing, and this cannot be manufactured, are real victims of the predator Kavanaugh when he was back in his days there in prep school, and that should come out. Lion Brett. Don't let Lion Brett get on the Supreme Court. This is a moral crisis of the state, of the absolute first magnitude. And, of course, even assuming the negative hypothesis that you can't stop him, you can inflict a terrible price on these Republican thugs and hypocrites for what they're willing to do to get somebody. And of course, on the Supreme Court, the Republicans fundamentally at the higher levels, and their donors above all, they don't care about abortion. They don't care about school prayer or religious rights or the Colorado bakers and all this nonsense. They care about union busting, depriving people of the right to vote, deregulating, and it's all money, money, and therefore power to get money. Now, the second question, of course, the happier one, right? The more encouraging one. We have to lead with the Kavanaugh stuff, because some of the affiliates take the first hour but not the second. I don't know any that take the second hour but not the first. But anyway, here we are. It's a Friday at the very end of summer, in that smoky, almost autumn weather, and cloudy, but still not too sort of moderate temperatures, although very humid. This is the point where, on a Friday in late summer, the Mueller team comes forward, and they have not let us down. The bulwarks of state and law have been active. They have not let the grass grow under their feet. So this is now a guilty plea from Manafort combined with a cooperation agreement. And this is a very, very big deal, right? In terms of the medium to longer run, this is ominous for Trump in the extreme, because everybody knows, right? You have to be born yesterday in order to believe that Trump has nothing to hide. He does nothing but hide. The key to his entire ruling passion is that he hides everything. He's always hid things, but now he has even more reason, but it's not going to work. So Manafort pleads guilty. Now, in this current framework, he's pleading guilty to two charges in particular. He's pleading guilty to a conspiracy against the United States. That would be various tax evasion, but by now it's especially his operations vis-a-vis Ukraine. Two conspiracy charges. First, conspiracy against the United States, and the second one is conspiracy to obstruct justice. And this refers to his antics in trying to put out articles and other things about his operations in Ukraine. Remember, Manafort comes from a law firm that was known as the Torturers' Lobby. All kinds of articles put that out. When he was named as the campaign boss for sure he was, in detail, delegate counter, convention strategist, the guy who got Trump through the crisis of the Republican convention, headed off possible challenges from Cruz or Kasich or others, or maybe a combination of those. So he's going to cooperate. Hats off to Andrew Weissman. Andrew Weissman, another guardian of the state and guardian of the rule of law, the lead prosecutor on Manafort in this trial, not so much in the one in Alexandria. At least I didn't see him asking questions. They said that he would often sit in the back of the courtroom. I don't think I saw him there. Anyway, maybe that was just not his moment in the courtroom. But he's going to talk about everything, and above all, this is some other features of this deal are designed, I think, to strike fear into the heart of Don, if he has one. So the Ukraine, right now, this is an interesting question in its own right, and it antedates Trump, but it's a grave evil that we have these corrupt U.S. election consultants who go and offer their network of lobbyists, corrupt journalists, influence brokers, and so forth. Manafort is an example of this, right? Going to help oppressive, odious governments around the world, including Ukraine and others. But Tony Podesta is on the hot seat. Vin Weber, former congressman, then lobbyist. Gregory Craig, former White House counsel. They're going to be, some of this stuff may go against them. Now, here's the part that's going to scare Trump. And I'm quoting here from the New York Times. As part of the deal, the government has the authority to seize 4 of Mr. Manafort's homes in New York and in Virginia, as well as the money in a number of bank accounts, because, of course, it goes along with the other case, right, where he's hiding, $60 million of income, allegedly ripping off taxpayers to the tune of $20 million. But, of course, the dupes who support Don there, they love tax evaders, right? Rich guys who don't pay their fair share for the Trump dupe. That's a great thing, as long as you're getting somebody like Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. So, Don Trump is worried because of this clawback element, right? That you have to cough up for properties and money. And we'll be back in a minute on World. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Here we are now speculating on what Manafort will be able to testify about. Remember, he was the boss of the campaign for 150 days, right in the middle of it, right in the critical phase, getting everything up and running. So what does he know about? The White House, of course, says, well, nothing. It has nothing to do with the victorious 2016 campaign, totally unrelated. I'm sorry. No, this will not be the case. Now, to what degree was the Trump campaign aware of Russian hacking, the targets of the Russian hacking, the timing of the publications on that, be it the stuff before the Democratic convention that Bernie had been treated unfairly and that therefore Wasserman Schultz had to go, and then later the Podesta emails that were rushed into the breach within an hour or two of the publication of the revelation of that embarrassing and pesky Access Hollywood tape. Now, another one is, it can be related to the first, what does Manafort know about the meeting that he took part in at Trump Tower? Veselnitskaya, the Russian government lawyer informant of Yuri Chaika, the Grand Inquisitor, the top state prosecutor of the Russian Federation. Kaveladze, we're getting stuff about Kaveladze this week, more about his expertise, his background in money laundering, in setting up bank accounts, anonymous ones, untraceable ones for various Russian oligarchs. Then Akhmetshin, formerly of Red Army Intelligence, and Samo Chornov, the translator, presumably just a bystander until proven otherwise. With who? With Don Jr., with Kushner, and with the now confessed felon Manafort. What's he going to tell us? Manafort, Kushner, Don Jr. set it up. Did Manafort take notes? And according to some, and we would join them, right? If you're looking for a smoking gun, this is going to be it. Now, the other thing, of course, is Kilimnik. Manafort's friend, his partner, his sidekick, Kilimnik, thought to be himself a Russian agent, asset, or something of the sort. Kilimnik is still hanging there, right? This trial could still go on. Of course, you don't usually try anybody in absentia in the U.S., but that's sort of the idea, that Kilimnik is a fugitive in Moscow. By the way, we've just had a top Russian hacker was arrested in Spain a couple of months ago, and this is now a matter of public attention. Don't say that just because the people are in Russia that it makes no sense, right, to indict them. That would go for the St. Petersburg 13, right, the 13 nationals, and then the 12 GRU officers. You think those people are going to stay in Russia? It's very difficult for them because the Slavophile mentality is hatred of the West, but fascination with the West, the desire to be in the West, right? Take a look at Dostoevsky spending his time at the Wiesbaden, Germany gambling casino, right? Look at all these people. They couldn't get enough of the putrid, rotten West. They had this horrible fascination. And, of course, Western luxury consumer goods, they love them. So Manafort, convicted in one trial, pled guilty in the other. Professor Dershowitz was on the radio, the television this morning saying, oh, well, Manafort is a window into Trump's operations, but only the campaign. They don't have anybody who gives them a window into the White House. Sorry, Professor Dershowitz, your apologetic intent has once more outdistanced the facts. How about Michael Flynn? How about the head of the National Security Council? Pled guilty. Haven't heard much about him. A key advisor, George Papadopoulos, pled guilty with his 2-week sentence, but some other stuff on top of that. It's a significant, it's more than an inconvenience. Rick Gates, who stayed on the campaign for the whole time. And then, of course, Alexander Van der Zwaan. And then we have Pinedo, the guy who created Internet identities. Kilimnik, indicted but a fugitive. So that makes a total of 26 Russian fugitives, and they cannot resist. They want Paris. They want the Riviera. They want London. They want the Discoteca of Milan. They can't stay away. They love it. You can see this with these people. Look at Slavophile personal biographies. If they can get out, they get out. That's the dualism, right, is that the Putin regime says that the Western governments, that the West is this horrible hell, but, of course, they can't wait to go there, right, and they want to have their children go to school there, and Medvedev wants to retire in California and all the rest of it. So you get the idea. So those are some points about what he may be able to talk about. So this is, again, it's the collapse of an entire line of defense, right? The Cohen line of defense collapsed on August 21st, day of destiny, turning point of this entire thing, in the polls as well. And now, the 14th of September, as we're recording, the Manafort line has collapsed. That entire defensive line has collapsed. Are there other defensive lines? I don't know. Maybe there's one with Kushner. Very, very difficult to say. So we are now more optimistic than ever about the ability of this system to restore legal government, to end this illegitimate insurrection. It's the insurrection of an unpopular minority against the will of the overwhelming masses of the people. They don't want to be stripped of social safety net. They don't want the Republican tax scam for the super rich. And again, the comparison, we went through it on the weekday show. Vichy France, Marshal Pétain. Maybe that's the best one for the moment. And we'll be back in a minute on World Crisis. Come back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley broadcasting from Washington, D.C. And let's now take a look at the Novichok case, right? The Novichok of the masses, the various elements of nerve gas. The nerve gas emanating from the Kremlin, and I'm sorry to say it, but it is the case, is nihilism. Nihilism, the nihilism which seems to derive from, and has for the past 200 years or more, nihilism deriving from the collision of the traditional Russian Orthodox Byzantine civilization, the collision of that with the West. So what's sort of what we were touching on in the previous segment, right? The world of the Slavophiles, right? Slavophiles, people like Komyakov, Kirievsky, Samarin, Danilevsky, others in the middle 19th century. But now we have this question of the Skripal murders and or attempted murder, and the actual murder that then followed that up. Now we have these two characters. We have Petrov and we have Boshirov. Ruslan Boshirov, with an O at the beginning, and you've also got this other guy, Alexander Petrov. So Petrov and Boshirov, sorry. And these are the ones that the British now accuse of delivering the Novichok to the home of Skripal, the Russian exiled refugee dissident, and or spy, if you want, and his daughter. So Simonyan, Margarita Simonyan, the head of Russia Today, one of the leading nihilists in the world, no doubt, a nihilist of the first magnitude. She personally, even though she's the top boss of Russia Today, RT, with a direct phone line from her desk to Putin and other bigwigs in the Kremlin, she personally does the interview with these two characters. Now, I'm looking at the London Guardian, the picture of these two. They claim to be the suspects. In other words, the British have put out photographs, and they want to see what happens. In other words, the British, of course, we know the British have these closed-circuit television cameras everywhere. So these guys show up on the cameras, right? And the helpful London Guardian will even show you where they appear in Salisbury, right? Where did they get their pictures taken? Two places inside the city of Salisbury, then another one at the station, I guess the railway station, and then another one slightly off to the west on the way to the Skripal home. These two guys are tough customers. They are plug uglies. You don't want to meet these two characters in a dark alley, okay? But they say no. They are cultural tourists, right? Kulturtouristen. The word that you often hear about Kulturdeutsche, right? The German tourists who are eager for culture. These are Kulturrussen, but the Kulturrussen, the cultural Russians, I'm afraid this is hard to maintain. So here are these two guys. And the only thing that Simonyan has to criticize about them is that they're nervous and sweaty, and they're not as fluent as usual. Now, here's their cover story. This is amazing. I think that the fiction writers of the GRU, which is what May says these guys are, and I think even May at this point can be right. He says, we went there because of the cultural tourism available in the city of Salisbury. Of course, we know all about Salisbury, right? It's the home of Mr. Pecksniff in Dickens, right? They don't mention that. Martin Chuzzlewit. Take a look. So they say that they went to Salisbury. They came all the way from Russia to Salisbury because they wanted to see the Salisbury Cathedral. Salisbury Cathedral is very high, and it's 123 meters. It's one of the highest spires you're going to find anywhere. They also have in Salisbury an ancient clock, a very early clock, which is still there, and I think even still going. Not sure about that. So they're saying, our friends had been suggesting for a long time that we visit this wonderful place, that it's a tourist destination. They got very close to Sergei Skripal's house on March 4th, right before the incident. But that's, of course, a complete coincidence. It's that they were on their way to get the cultural enrichment that they felt that they really needed. Bashirov said, we went to visit Salisbury Cathedral, famous not just in Europe, but in the whole world, famous for its 123-meter spire, famous for the clock, the first one of its kind ever created in the world, and it's still working. Maybe we got close to Skripal's house, but we didn't know where that was. That was something, and we were in the dark. So the other question is, how come you had to go there twice? You went there twice. They visited Salisbury not once, but twice. Once on the 3rd of March, once on the 4th of March. The British police say the first one was to case the joint, right? British police say the first brief visit was to stake out the city, case the place in good American sort of Chicago gangster language. No, Petrov and Bashirov say, no, we were too cold. We were cold. And remember, England is an island surrounded by water, meaning the temperatures are not that extreme. These guys come from the continental climate, right? Maybe they've been guards in Siberia. We don't know, but no, too much. We arrived in Salisbury on March 3rd, and we tried to walk through the town, but we lasted for only half an hour because it was covered in snow, says Petrov to Simonyan. We specifically went there the second time to see the old Sarum. This is some kind of archaeological dig. We wanted to see Stonehenge. That's located on Salisbury Plain. And we decided to finish everything up on March 4th. They spent an hour in Salisbury on March 3rd, mainly because of the lags between trains. We were just taking in the English Gothic style. Nobody shows that part. The cameras mainly show them at railway stations. Then, how do what did you have with you? Then there's this famous story. The British say that some of the nerve agent, the Novichok, was in a Nina Ricci perfume bottle, say the investigators. Novichok in a perfume bottle. And Bashirov says, is it silly for decent lads to have women's perfume? The customs are checking everything. They would have questions as to why to have women's perfume and we didn't have. Then there's, are you two guys gay? Why do you always travel together? You're always there. And they say they don't want to respond. And Simonyan says, I don't know if they're gay, but they're very stylish. More I can't say. They have beards and haircuts with tight pants. Oh, my God. Back in a minute on World Crisis. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Our last segment here. Time flies. But this is now a mockery. This is the Russian authorities have discredited themselves with these two characters. And again, Simonyan says, I don't know what to say. I know they were sweating and nervous, but I can't conclude anything. That's up to you to judge. Isn't that wonderful and democratic? No, that's cynicism and above all nihilism. Nihilism is a very specific branch, I guess, of nihilism with certain cynicism, with cultural coordinates, right? So we're talking about the doctrines of Diogenes, the cynic, of Sinope, and also then the nihilists that we see the Russian brand starting in the 19th century. Poor Putin has now debased himself. He is now, he comes out and says, oh, these two guys were civilians. They're not from the GRU. May had said they're from the GRU. All right, so I'm afraid you now have to ask yourself if Putin and others around him can have people rubbed out in this way, or serious attempts mounted by plug uglies like these two characters, right? Then things have come very far. We know that the Trump executive order this week is a fake. Here's the way it works, right? This is a shuck. We talked about this in detail on the Daily Show. The executive order written by Bolton is a fraud. It's a shuck. It's a sop. Why is it? Election day happens. At that point, the Director of National Intelligence, Coates, has 45 days to make a complaint or to denounce something that went on. That then goes to the Department of Homeland Security and to the Attorney General. They have another 45 days to decide what to do. Then they pass it on to the State Department and the Treasury to decide specifically what to do. I guess the DHS and the DOJ say, yes, there was an offense and it's this. Then the State Department and the Treasury say, okay, we decide to exact these penalties. So there are 3 escape clauses, and of course the biggest escape clause of all is Trump working in the background. So 3 layers of bureaucratic cop-out with Trump superintending the entire thing. That's just a fraud. So Rubio and Van Hollen are right. That is totally inadequate. Now, we're always looking for historical context. Let's remind people of the German experience. What can we say? You cannot simply rule this stuff out because it's such a big part of the experience of modern Europe. And then in the 20th century, it's a big part of the experience of the world. So you're going to rule that out and say that was all unique. That was all sui generis. You can't touch any of that because that's somehow sacrilegious to the victims. I see it the other way around. Right? It's the deliberate blindness that allows these same mistakes to be together. So we're pointing the attention now to a new the first volume of a new biography of Hitler called The Ascent, 1889, his birthday, 1889, to 1939, his first 50 years, by Volker Ulrich. Volker Ulrich, I think he works for Die Zeit, the weekly of Hamburg. So we may not get through all of this, but we'll be coming back to it, and it underlies some of our analysis. This is from a book review in the New York Times by Michiko Kakutani. Michiko Kakutani, September 2016. She did this review, very timely and very timely still. So the question is, how does Hitler get to be dictator of Germany? An important German magazine in 1930 wrote about Hitler as a half-insane rascal, a pathetic dunderhead. I think it must be Dummkopf, a nowhere fool, a big mouth, ein Großmaul, I think, trying to back translate some of this stuff. How could he become a dictator? A very unlikely pretender to high state office. Now, there have been various theories, as many theories as there are biographers, but now we have Ulrich, who puts the accent on demagogy, showmanship, and nativist appeals to the masses. So Mein Kampf, largely a smokescreen in this reading, but that Hitler, as a mysterious, calamitous figure, undoubtedly had talents and deep-seated psychological complexes. Okay? So At the beginning of the political phase, he's a Munich rabble-rouser. He's described as a narcissistic clown with a scattershot, impulsive style, but nevertheless gets to be dictator. Couple of quotes. Hitler was often described as an egomaniac who loved only himself, a narcissist with a taste for self-dramatization, and a characteristic, this is now Ulrich, characteristic fondness for superlatives. His approach was manic. Everything was 100%, all or nothing. At the time of, Munich, he said he was a Vabank Spieler. He was a all or nothing, double or nothing gambler. Keen eye for the strengths and weaknesses of others and how to exploit situations. Lying. Hitler was known among his colleagues for a bottomless mendacity that was then amplified by the Goebbels propaganda apparatus. A former finance minister, who's this going to be? Schacht, maybe? Doesn't say here. Hitler was so thoroughly untruthful that he could no longer recognize the difference between lies and truth. Mein Kampf, already in the early 20s, a swamp of lies, distortions, innuendos, half-truths, with a couple of actual facts thrown in. An effective orator and actor using masks, feeding off the energy of audiences. Sometimes a mask of moderation was used to avoid upsetting certain middle-class interests or maybe some bankers who wanted to keep some respectability, but mainly aimed at a lower middle-class, nationalist, reactionary, ethnic chauvinist, racist, anti-Semitic public. Fomented chaos by playing to fears and resentments. And, of course, the main promise was to end the humiliation. You were going to be played as the sucker at Versailles, and you're burdened with reparations. You've got to lead Germany to a new era of national greatness. Return to greatness, restore greatness. What the actual plans were always quite vague. Main thing is paint the present day in hues that were very dark. In other words, talk bad, diss the current situation of the country. In the speeches, large audiences were hypnotized by repeated mantra-like phrases consisting mainly of accusations, vows of revenge, and promises for the future. And he says the masses have a very low intellectual level. The understanding of the masses is feeble, and we've got to boil everything down to a few slogans that have to be repeated and repeated until the very last individual has come to grasp the idea that we're putting forward. So that's at least some part, significant part, of this book review of the new Hitler biography, and I think the relevance of that is ought to be fairly obvious. So this is Webster Tarpley saying goodbye to you until Monday. Please join us over at the American System, americansystem.tv. We'll be back next week.